Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel.
Okay, now it's time to get into shock absorbers. So I went ahead and drew up in CAD and printed a little fan mount. This is going to bolt with a pair of M3s right to the 3 threaded holes that are already present in this motor mount bracket right here. So that's going to basically mount right there. And then the fan will be attached to that. So that's going to put the fan almost touching the motor, about 3 millimeters away. Perfect distance to make sure that there's good airflow into this part of the motor here, where the front of the motor is all opened up. This circuit board and the inner workings are going to get a nice blast of air. That'll help keep them cool, and that's essential to getting good run times and not having your car shut down because of a heat overload issue. Potentially could run a maybe 1 tooth higher gear. May not have a huge effect, but it's certainly when it gets into the heat of the summer and we're running, you know, on 100-degree days, every bit of cooling for the motor is definitely worth having. So one little thing I needed to do was these holes are threaded almost all the way to the top. There are screw locations from below. They aren't used for whatever reason. So I went ahead and tapped them the rest of the way through. All that takes is an M3 tap and a handle with which you can twist it in from the bottom. That's already threaded most of the way, so it was a simple thing to just finish tapping through the top millimeter that hadn't been threaded, and so now I can thread down from above. Simple. I did a little bit of a redesign on the mount, and I created this little plenum here, which mounts over the back side of the fan, and as you can see, it kind of hugs the motor and helps direct the airflow into the motor. It makes sure that the majority of the air that's being pushed through that fan is going to go where it's needed, as opposed to just up and away and around the motor. Okay, I'm just getting things soldered up, and I wanted to give you some recommendations. This is a big one right here. There's a lot of different batteries out there, and sometimes you want to buy something very specific, or sometimes you want to get something that you know is in the right range, you know, size, number of cells, but it's on sale. Even if it's not your manufacturer of choice, it's a bargain you don't want to pass on. Bullet connectors. There are so many batteries now that are not following a standard. They're either 4 or 5 millimeter, and it would be nice if manufacturers had picked one and stuck, but they haven't. It's completely at random, and getting bullet connectors that are 4 and 5 millimeter is like a must, because if you get just 4s or if you get just 5s, sooner or later you're going to have a battery. You may not be paying attention when you purchase it or whatever, but you're going to put a battery in your car and you're not going to be able to plug into it because you've got the wrong size. It's either too small or it's too big. If you get these, you can't lose. And that is just, you know, one thing to get trouble off your back. I've got several shorty packs that are 4s and several that are 5s. And I have been using these on pretty much all of my cars lately. Any car that I'm even anticipating that I'm going to use bullet connectors, I go with these. So big recommendation there. Definitely do that. When you're wiring up stuff, try to keep it clean. Try to give yourself some slack. I could have made these more direct runs, but you want to make sure that if you need to move something a little bit, you've got some slack to work with. Also, you don't want the motor, you don't want tension on things. That's just a sure way to have things vibrate and then break or whatever. This is a nice way to coil up wires right here. This is just clear heat shrink tubing. I fold up the wire a couple times on itself, slide on this nice big piece of heat shrink, hit it with a cigarette lighter for a couple seconds, and shrink it right up around the wire, and that keeps them bundled. I think it's better than using zip ties. I've used zip ties before, but zip ties tend to they almost want to cut into the silicone, and you're grabbing it in a center. You're not getting it down the length of the fold. This seems to work quite nicely. Even though it's a tight fold, if it's done the one time and it stays that way, there's no back and forth on it, it's not going to fatigue, it's not going to become a problem and break down the road. I'll probably never cut this or this loose. I tend to build my cars and leave them built. I don't usually switch things from one car to another. The only time I would like replace this speed control would be if it was broken, and or if I moved up to a modified class with this chassis. Otherwise it's going to stay there. So it's a good idea to assume at least that things are going to be permanent. Now, this is something I've got to deal with right here, is the fact that this wire is just not long enough. I don't know why they make these connections so short, but it is what it is. I'm not going to use an extension. An extension would just be a big bundle of wire, and I don't want to do that. It's not a weight issue, it's just, I guess, neatness or whatever. So what I'm probably going to do is cut this off, and I'll use I'll take like a servo extension and clip it, get rid of the signal wire, and then just solder up the positive and negative connections and get myself that extra, I only need about 3/4 of an inch of travel. It almost reaches, just not quite. So anyway, that is what that is. So I've already bound the receiver, tested it, steering works nice and smooth. I've really been happy with this kit. I know I've said it at least several times in every video, but this kit has come along very nicely. I did zip tie the capacitor up here on my positive and negatives. Another thing to do when you are setting up your battery connectors, I try to set them up so that one of them is shorter than the other, so that the positive can't reach to the negative side. That way it just makes it easier to not make a mistake. How you do that, up to you, but that's something I do like to do. I could try to keep this closer down, but I don't want any risk of this touching the belt. And this is a large car body on here. This is a big vacuous area, so having a couple of wires sticking up is not a problem at all. So I just need to cut these two to length, solder these up, and then do my fan, and that should be the end of my wiring issues. I got a pinion on here. As you can see, it's a 35. That's one of the places I used my Biddy Design permanent pen to. I bought a handful of these combination aluminum and plastic gears, and I marked each one of them because they weren't stamped or in some way marked with the tooth count, so I wanted to make sure that I could easily identify them. These are 25.5 turn motors. They're not extremely powerful, but that's the VTA class. Again, this is designed to make these cars a little more of a level playing field. That gear will handle the power that's going to be put through this drivetrain. And this gear is plastic anyway, so it shouldn't be an issue. One thing I did do, you can kind of see, I did grind the fiberglass. You can't see as much from this side. Underneath, I kind of used a conical shaped grinding wheel or grinding tip with my Dremel to shape the underside of this a little bit so that I can fit a larger gear than the one I have on here. This one was almost touching the fiberglass top plate, so I just removed a little material, basically cut down this way maybe 2 millimeters, and then shaped the inside kind of like a trough, so that it's thinner in the center just for a short distance. So that takes care of that. So it looks like everything's just about done. I'm hoping that I'm going to get to race this weekend. We've got rain coming in, so I don't know. And I'm also hoping I get to give it a test drive. I've got to program and configure the speed control. There's a small list of things I need to put on my transponder. What I'm probably going to do is trim the plastic tab off of this side and maybe off of the front. I may just leave the front because that's not going to get in the way. And what I'll probably do is anchor it right here. And so I will trim off the front either to this screw or this screw, and then stretch the wire over to here, and that will work nicely as a mounting location for this. There's no other place to really put it. I suppose I could anchor to one of those, but again, I don't want anything that could potentially touch this. I'm going to look and see if I can find a guide. If you're not familiar with touring cars, a lot of touring cars will have a little plastic piece here with a bearing, and the bearing has a raised edge on either side, kind of the way these gears have an edge on either side. And again, it's just a ball bearing, but it's that those edges provide, it's not to tension, it's just to keep it aligned so that when this thing is spinning fast, that it keeps it lined up so that it's going down this gear here, and it's not, you know, moving around at speed. So that's kind of a universal item. I can probably find one from another vehicle and it'll probably mount up. Usually they're mounted on a center line, and the kind of measurements you've got here where the, you know, belt on this side, belt on this side, that's a very standard kind of layout for touring cars. So I'll probably find something that I can work or make work. You know, worst case, I might need to put a few little shims in to adjust the location of the bearing, but I think I'll probably be able to find something off the shelf that will fit. So I'll show you that when and if I get one. And otherwise, it looks like I'm ready to go VTA racing. The body is in paint process. Everything's coming together with that. It's just doing a nice, simple, a bright orange body color with 2 white stripes front to back. Very standard 60s, late 60s, early 70s style paint job. So again, trying to keep, you know, period correct with that. So I wanted to get a belt tension or a belt guide for the top here. Because when the car is moving forward, the belt is moving from here to here, this direction, and you want to make sure that it doesn't get any slack going or drop off. This is a kit by Goblin Helicopters. It's for a tail belt, I believe. In any event, this is the part number. I just did a search on AMain Hobbies for belt guides, and that's what I came up with as the best option for me to build something myself. Of course, you never know the size of anything off of a kit like that. They don't tell you screw sizes. This screw is one of mine. Basically, you get these two standoff-like things, a couple of little screws, this plastic piece, and two of these wheels with bearings in them. Now, this is the main part I wanted. Anything else I could do for myself. And I was just pulled this out to confirm that it is an M4 hole right there. So that's perfect. So I am right now printing a block I designed that is going to mount to any two of these holes. I'm probably going to mount it forward most, and it will put a little bit of downward pressure on the belt, and hopefully, if I've measured everything right, this edge, flanged edge here, should be close enough. It'll be right about center line on the screws, this inner edge, so that it'll keep the belt from moving far enough over to drop off of the wheel here, and that should do it. We'll see. Plus, that little bit of downward pressure is going to make it catch the wheel a little faster, a little easier, so we'll see how that goes. When the piece comes off, I'll go ahead and set it up. As you can see, I am mostly done. I've got my transponder on here. I've got my on and off switch two-sided tape onto the little servo bracket here. All my wires are wrapped and done. I've got my fan with the little fan shroud that I designed and the mount that I designed. The 3D printer is really coming handy on this build. It's also, I did that little battery brace to keep the battery positioned correctly for the shorty packs. So now it is about time to do some general suspension tuning and get this prepped for its first runs. And that's going to involve setting up camber, toe, rear camber, and any other adjustments, ride height. That's what I'm going to try to do in this video for you, as well as setting up this little piece here. That shouldn't have a big impact on anything as far as setup goes. So while that's printing over here, I'm going to go ahead and get going with this stuff. So I'm just going to set these pieces aside. I'm only, from the kit that I purchased, I'm really only using one of these. So I'll have another roller later for some other belt-driven kit if need be. And if not, no big deal. So first thing I need to do is get out a tuning board. This is a 1/10 scale tuning board. And let me just check my setup sheet for my ride heights. Okay, from what I'm seeing, most people have about 0.8 millimeter difference front to rear fairly consistently, or they are equal front to rear. In the 5 millimeter range seems to be where most people are going. I am running on asphalt versus carpet, but I'm going to kind of shoot for that ballpark anyway, because they usually clean the track off pretty well ahead of time. Okay. So let me see where here in the rear. Okay, we're way high in the rear, as I expected. And we're pretty high in the front, too. So... Okay. Okay. Now, these are very coarse threads, so even an eighth of a turn makes a pretty dramatic difference, as much as a couple of millimeters almost. Something to just bear in mind. Okay, so I've got my ride height ballparked out where I want it. And one way to help you get kind of a left and right balance is to check from both sides on the outer edge of the chassis here and here, and that kind of helps you see if you're getting close to level, but that's not how you really want to determine that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the video and put on these. If you've watched any of my tuning videos before, you've probably seen these, or one of my other tuning tool sets. These go on in place of the wheels, and they help you make better adjustments than you can get off of the wheels themselves. Okay, I've just been doing some tuning, and I also just finished assembling this. It just came off the printer. This is my second iteration. I had a few minor adjustments to make, and it seems to work great. Basically, it's going to attach right here. I'm going to put it at its forwardmost position. As you can see, it puts just a little bit of down pressure, maybe 3 millimeters, 2 millimeters push against the belt. So that should work quite nicely. And to keep the weight down, this is a titanium screw, and I've got a couple more titanium screws to add this on, so I'm not adding anything substantial to the car. Now, for tuning, when you start adjusting things, like for example camber, you can adjust camber in a vacuum, as it were. The camber is not affected by something else. If you point the wheel straight ahead, or you point the steering knuckle straight ahead, you can adjust this camber link here to get the wheels camber. I'm using 2 degrees front and rear. Now, the first thing you want to do, though, is you want to adjust the linkage that goes from your steering rack to your servo. So what you want to do is basically line up your steering rack, center this visually, and then adjust your steering turnbuckle until your servo arm is straight up and down. Once you have that done, then you can adjust toe. And again, you want to make sure that you keep your rack in a centered position when you're measuring your toe. So in other words, if you want to get, you know, 1 degree of toe in, you want to make sure that you do that in such a way that you're not skewing your steering rack to get there. So you need to tighten or loosen each of these two turnbuckles until you get each of the two wheels pointed a half a degree in, thus giving you a degree of toe, or 2 degrees to get 2 degrees of toe, etc. But you need to make sure that both of these are adjusted from the perspective of the rack being centered. Otherwise, you're going to get more steering left versus right, or right versus left. In any event, you'll end up with issues. So I'm going to pause the video again for a moment. Also, rear camber, again, there's nothing is going to affect that. There's no other adjustments in the rear right now other than ride height and camber, so I can adjust these two camber links. I went ahead and swapped out the ball studs here for some titanium, excuse me, it's a Teflon coated aluminum. It's aftermarket ball studs that are sold by 3Racing. I went ahead and got a couple packs in 2 different lengths so that I can add or remove spacers. I wanted to have, if you recall, the existing ball studs were rather short with a 2mm spacer on them. And so I wanted to have something that was at least 1 millimeter or 2 longer, so there was a little more metal inside the plastic here so those don't get broken. So I did take care of that, and at some point the next time I do a major rebuild for cleaning, I'll probably replace all of the steel with the aluminum ones just to have that Teflon coating versus just chromed steel. It's not going to remove a lot of weight, but it will make for a smoother ball stud action. It's a small change, but I have them, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But again, that won't be till I have like a major rebuild of some type. So what I need to do is I need to remove the 4 screws here, and remove this panel so I can put screws in from below. Those are going to thread directly into this plastic piece. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.